The Swiss Family Robinson, Chapter 33, Wanderers from Home. One morning, soon after the incidents just narrated, I discovered from various allusions that the boys were meditating an excursion on their own. To this, I conceived no reasonable objection could be offered, for an occasional change of occupation was advantageous to all of us. I accordingly expressed my approbation of the project so soon as it was explained to me. At once Fritz ran off to his mother, who was at work in her garden, and begged of her to give him some meat. Also he proposed to make pemmican. "Very good, my dear boy," replied she, "but I must first beg of you to tell me what pemmican is." He replied that it was a preparation of meat used by the North Americans and was an especial favorite among the fur traders of Canada. When they go off on trading excursions among the Red Indians, it consists of boar's or goat's flesh, first cooked and then beaten up into a sort of paste, which forms a most substantial nourishment, since a very small portion suffices for a meal. And as it is very portable, it is thus the most convenient food for travelers. Sometimes it is prepared by first drying the meat in the wind and sun and pounding it up with the fruit and shad bush commonly called the serviceberry. Fritz was obliged to explain to his mother that he had an excursion in view, and after some little coaxing he gained his point and returned with the needful supply of meat. This the boys set to work to prepare into pemmican. When it was ready, I tasted a piece of it to satisfy Fritz, and found that by no means it was unpalatable. But these were not the only preparations. Hampers, sacks, small wicker wood, cages, and a variety of other utensils were got ready, and the old sledge was next brought out and mounted on the pair of cannon wheels. A small tent was also taken along with an abundant supply of ammunition and provisions. At length, the morning of departure arrived. On getting up to see them set out, I observed that Jack carried off very mysteriously several of our European pigeons, which he had secured in a small wicker baskets I had before observed. As my wife had declined to join at present in any expedition, and Ernest also intimated his intention of remaining behind, I resolved likewise to stay at home and employ the time in constructing an apparatus for crushing the sugar canes in order to obtain the sugar in some more manageable form than we had heretofore been able to do, a thing which my wife had long desired. All the preparations of our travelers were meanwhile completed, and a hearty repast partaken, during which I availed myself of a favorable opportunity for giving them such good counsel as I thought most suited for their present movements. They departed in high spirits, and we watched them till they crossed the bridge and disappeared beyond the wood that lay inland from Falcon's Nest. I lost no time in setting about my sugar mill. I constructed 3 vertical rollers between which the sugar canes could be crushed, and to which I adapted some of the wheels originally designed for the intended sugar works at the new colony for which our ship was bound. This could be set a-going by harnessing our cow to it, so that much personal labor was thereby spared, and we soon had a most efficient apparatus completed. While Ernest and I were finding abundant and agreeable occupation and thus taxing our ingenuity for the general good, and occasionally soliciting the advice or assistance of my dear wife, who was watching our proceedings with lively interest, our young adventurers were pushing their way towards the savannah and experiencing sundry novel adventures which they failed not to recount to us on their return. On the first evening of their absence, after a day laboriously and industriously spent, my dear Elizabeth and I were seated at the entrance of our comfortable and well-furnished grotto at Rock Castle, conversing together. Our conversation naturally turned to on the absent members of our family, and while my wife and I were wondering and guessing as to what they might be doing, Ernest surprised us by saying, "I think it will not be long before we have news of my brothers." My wife asked him what he meant by this remark, and I was surprised when Ernest thus replied, "Tomorrow morning, my dear parents, I hope to be able to communicate to you the news of where they are and what they are about." Truly, said I, somewhat ironically. Do you propose to set out on a visit to them and be your own carrier in bringing back the news? Ernest made no reply, but his mother, whose anxiety about her boys was too great to admit of her indulging in my jesting on the subject, asked him how he could be so thoughtless to speak in that kind of manner. Not at all, said Ernest. I am indulging in no foolish dream, yet I hope before long to communicate news to you about the absent travelers. While we were thus conversing, a bird alighted on the dovecot and entered. It was already so dark that we could not discern whether it was one of our pigeons or some strange bird, and as it was long past the usual hour for our retiring to the rest, I feared it might be some dangerous intruder, but Ernest at once interposed. Shut up the dovecot, he said. Shut it up. What would you say if the bird was a bearer of letters from Europe? You speak, said I, as if that country was actually in our vicinity. I am aware, however, that it is sometimes pleasant, my dear Ernest, to indulge in such daydreams. But let us now to bed, and tomorrow you can give audience to your courier, and tell us the news of the world from which we are shut out. Thus saying, I wished him good night, and we withdrew to our couches to enjoy our well-earned repose. So a dove came and went into their dovecot, which is where the doves are kept, and they closed the door, and he's saying that he has news now of his brothers. So we'll see what happens.